Okay. Hi, everyone. How are you? Is everyone, day 3, does it feel like day 20? Yeah, you're doing Sundance right if you're like, what? I just have been here for 2 hours. Welcome. I am actually so thrilled to be here. I have to say, I just ran over from another venue. So if you see me like huffing and puffing, you know why. But this is a really special conversation. It actually comes at just the right moment. And this is a really special team. And yes, I'm a little biased sometimes. This is true. My name is Carrie Lozano. I am CEO of ITVS. And for those of you who don't know, ITVS is the premier co-producer of independent documentary for public media. And we present the series Independent Lens. And thank you. Three Chaplains is an ITVS co-production and was on Independent Lens. Now I'm losing track, but 2023. Time flies. But I want to, why I think there's a lot of reasons why this is an important conversation, but one of the things we've all been talking about, of course, is distribution. And as we know, distribution is going through a moment. It's a turbulent time in our field, and that's fiction and nonfiction and news and media. It's all the things, including, the politics of the moment. But the question comes up even in unrelated sessions. It's like, well, what are we going to do about distribution? And I think this team, thanks to, in large part, the Doris Duke Foundation, which is also sponsoring this panel. So thank you to the Doris Duke Foundation, to Maureen and others on the team. We're really excited to talk about the choices that David and Rosie made, and they are choices. And so we decided we're gonna play this casual. We are gonna tee things up, but we also wanna have a conversation and we wanna answer your questions. But I would love it if both of you would introduce yourselves, and David, we'll start with you. Sure. Talk about your work, and then I want you guys to tee up Three Chaplains and tee up the clip that we're gonna see as well.
Okay. You tee up the clip. Yeah, so I'm the director and producer on the film. It was, one of those independent documentaries that took like 7 years to make. But it evolved out of a short film series that Doris Duke also gave some money to, as did other foundations, Open Society Foundation and others, where I did some like 3-minute micro-documentaries with Muslims who had served in post 9/11 era in U.S. military. And in many ways, that film project, which I collaborated with, like the Washington Post released one of these, NBC News, San Diego Union Tribune, another. In many ways, the film evolved out of that, and that project was like a lower commitment, but I was able to find some of the storytellers that ultimately made it in the film. So, another filmmaker tip, like you don't have to think like big feature film. You can start somewhat smaller and potentially find really good characters that way, because we're always looking to find good characters. So from that short film series, I got the courage to apply to the Department of Defense to get access to film active duty service members. And it's seemingly actually quite simple process, but one of the main things they were asking in the process is, do you have distribution, and are you fully funded? And how many of us independent filmmakers can say that, right? Especially at that point. And I had one public affairs officer who's kind of honest with me at that point. He said, we really don't check.
I was gonna say.
Oh well, this is being recorded, so I really would like to have like real talk. I'd prefer this not to be recorded, but here we go. We all have credit cards, so I could be fully funded, right? And I have I've worked with public media enough that there are ways to get it out there. NIDA, APT. It doesn't all have to be big and fancy, right? So that started me on a process of then working with some of the chaplains that I met doing the short film project that evolved into the Three Chaplains film, which we'll watch a clip of. It's about 3 Muslim chaplains who serve in the military. Chaplains, if you don't know, are ordained clergy. They all have master's degrees, like a master's in divinity equivalent. They're endorsed by a religious body, and they serve as commissioned officers in the U.S. military. So they're both ordained clergy, but they also serve in like a mental health and emotional health capacity as counselors. So they wear many hats. And for me, what was really interesting, and again, going back to the short film series, was I guess I kind of had this impression, partly I was naive in a way because, I come not from a cohort of people that served in the military. I didn't think I knew one person growing up who did. So I had a lot of misconceptions myself, to be self-critical. And I guess I started from this idea that, post 9/11, you're serving in the military, like everybody's got to have some kind of really, powerful, dramatic story. And the fact is that that's not the case, right? That's a misconception. You can just have a very, honorable job you're serving in the military, but it doesn't mean you have like a dramatic story. And from doing this short film project, I found these chaplains, and I was like, oh, there's good juice here. So there's more of like a feature film concept. And then, of course, got access and started on the process of making this film, which, I filmed for, Rozzy did some shoots as well. We filmed for about two to 3 years. COVID happened. We had to kind of shut things down. And then on the other side of the major shutdown, we were able to finish up. The film was on Independent Lens in 2023. We launched one month after October 7th. Which was, really threw a wrench in our plans. It was both, obviously a very negative thing that happened to our world. But we had originally been thinking this film, it's about these religious leaders in the U.S. military. It's about the stereotypical outsider on the inside. There was already at that time a lot of pushback around, too much diversity, too much woke military, and we saw this film as potentially like a counter-programming to that energy. October 7th happens, and then we really had to kind of rethink how are we going to talk about the film. And so, we're going to show a clip, but that's who I am, and happy to be here.
Rozzy, will you introduce yourself?
Oh,
Before we show the clip. Sorry.
Just really quickly, hello everyone, Assalamu alaikum. Good to see everyone this afternoon. My name is Rozzy Jaffrey. I'm a Detroit-based documentary filmmaker and producer. Kind of have two hats. I'm an independent filmmaker. I also have a day job at NPR where I also produce and make documentaries. And I came to filmmaking from a very non-traditional background. I have an engineering degree, which is what I did for 10 years. The first 10 years of my professional life, left that to tell stories about American Muslims. And I was particularly interested in stories about Muslims in American civic life. We'll get into some of the projects I've worked on in the past, but the first film that I worked on is also distributed by public media, the film called Hamtramck USA, which explores life and democracy in America's first Muslim majority city. So naturally, the extension of Muslims in public life in other areas of the core institutions of our democratic system, democracy, the military, journalism, the law. It felt like the right project to get involved in, a very challenging project to get involved in, but and then David and I had a creative partnership for 6 years working on the film together, but that's how I came to the project, and then we'll talk more after the clip. So.
Great.
Yeah. Well, come on, set up the clip real quick.
Please.
Yeah. So this is this film takes place at military installations around the country. You're not going to see a ton of that in this clip, but this for Rozzy and I was one of the hardest things to get at in this film, because I think we really didn't want to make this film that was going to be, I guess, overly glorifying military service. We want to just be very honest about the people's roles, but it's a complex, complicated subject. But we also were, really wanted to get at this heart of the contradiction of serving when there's so much, honestly, violence that happens, and the real emotional impact that it has on the Muslims who are serving, the Muslim community members. And we had worked on how are we going to do this, and we had filmed with a very prominent Imam Zaid Shakir, who's a veteran, because he's a really powerful speaker, and we were editing with the footage, and it was quite felt like we were kind of editorializing with his scene versus something that was organic. And then this scene came together where you're going to see the first woman in the military, Muslim woman, who applied to become a chaplain and was denied, advising one of our main characters, Saleha, who ultimately does become the first female chaplain. And so they have this intergenerational conversation, Saleha starting out very idealistic, Sharita having served for a long time, and then the emotional impact of their conversation, I think, was really central to the film. That's why we chose this clip. Yeah.
Okay, now we can play the clip. Tease, tease, tease.
People would come up to me and say, "Thank you for serving your country." I felt proud wearing my uniform. When they see me in this uniform, it's like, go back to your country where you came from. You're not American. They don't know who I am from looking at me dressed as a Muslim woman.
So I think there's a much more reason for Muslims to be serving, because we are doing the right thing. We uphold the values of life. We uphold the value of serving humanity, regardless of any affiliation, as Muslims. And that's what military does. We are there to protect and serve.
I appreciate that, and I understand that. But having retired now, and having been through this longest war that our nation has been in, there's been a lot of horrible actions by our military personnel. And I just say, see the glass half full sometimes, and it's also it's important to see it half empty and not be so idealistic. I give you that piece of advice after having been through 35 years of military service. I don't think I would join the military today. And so it is hard for me to say that to you. But at the same time, I'm so happy that you've answered the call to break that barrier. Because when you break it for all of us. So inshallah.
When I first signed the contract, and I talked to some of my close female Muslim friends, and the questions I was asked was, why do you want to join force with a system that is hell-bent on destroying your own Muslim sisters and brothers? That was one of the first things I was thrown at in my face. Where in our religion, in Islam, does it say that you're not supposed to work for your own country?
Islam isn't a pacifist religion, and I'm not a pacifist. I believe that each citizen should stand up and defend the rights of his country. And I didn't have an issue of being in the military or going off to war as needed. But the one part that really tripped me up was when the reports from Abu Ghraib came out. Because I felt like we went against the Geneva Convention. It haunted me. I think it continued even till this day. And then learning about drone attacks. So many civilians die. Couldn't we do this any differently? I feel we've gone to a point as Americans that there's no returning, and we need to stop it, or else I think we've almost lost our soul.
That line lands in a very particular way
now,
today.
for sure.
And that's the important of this storytelling, right? Where these stories continue to resonate, and they resonate differently in different moments. One of the things that I'd love for you to talk about are the distribution decisions that you made, and in a way, it was clear signals that things were going to be tough a couple years ago, but they've gotten much harder when it comes to distribution. But from the beginning, and I talked to both of you over the years that you were making this, you really had a vision for what you wanted this film to do. Lay the groundwork for us in terms of what you were thinking, what you were hoping for, and then how you started to go about it. Because these conversations are very salient now in terms of what are the possible pathways to getting your film out, And how do you begin thinking about that really, really early on in the production process?
Yeah, and we can talk about this film. Razi, has similar things. I've had 3 films through, public television. Razi, several as well. So we can broaden out. But with this film, yeah, we were fortunate enough to get ITVS open call, which if that in many ways part of the contract and co-production means you're going to be giving the film to public television for free. And I was fortunate enough to work with a previous grantee of the Arthur Vining Davis Foundation, who worked in this, who I met at the Nate Walker, who I met at the MPAC Media Awards, where we both received an award, and he was my doppelganger on stage, the other blonde-haired white dude, and we bonded. Thank you, Sue. Sue, if that didn't happen, this would have never happened. He was a previous grantee of this foundation, and we kind of collaborated about like how can we get the film out there. And so this is like kind of lessons for other filmmakers, like versus just like working with a foundation cold, going through the front door. Really important to like find other grantees who have been funded and learn lessons from them. Even consider paying them a small consultancy fee or bringing them onto your team. They will help immensely in helping you navigate a relationship with a foundation. And so in our case, Nate was like, oh, this is really good. You want to pitch to this foundation. I think this is how you should consider pitching to them. And so what we ended up designing with his help was a fellowship for students interested in interfaith leadership to screen our film on campuses and act as a host. So traditionally, like in the educational distribution, like you're looking to go on campus and have campuses bring you there and pay you to come there. This was the opposite. So we used the foundation money to create a fellowship, and then we paid students to act as hosts and fellows on campuses for us. They know their campus well enough. They know how to work with religious studies professors, veterans organizations, Muslim student organizations, interfaith clubs to bring students to their screenings. So we've had 50 plus screenings on college campuses, mostly organized by students. So we kind of like reversed it that way. And I think speaking to the distribution aspect, what's important about that, and one of the kind of key things that we kind of threw out was we have not worked with like an educational distributor. Because if we did, they're going to say, well, if you're going on campuses, we want whatever, they have to buy it, right? Yeah. So all of these screenings on campuses, we were paying students. We didn't make any money from those, right? So the revenue to pay us has come through the foundations. So that's a bit of a twist. And I think in many ways we've had more success showing things on campuses because, God, I mean, campuses have less money now, And then so we brought on the Doris Duke Foundation as a secondary partner to this campaign to supplement and also then work with Department of Defense partners, veteran partners. I really wanted to have this film shown.
Chaplaincy organizations.
And chaplaincy organizations, exactly. All organizations that are cash poor themselves, but want this content. And so instead of going to them and saying like, we want to show it at your conference, pay us $2,500, and you'd be like, sorry, we don't have that. But if we can come to them and say, hey, actually, we're funded. We want to give you this film. And we have funds to pay for travel, and we can talk about that to come to you and speak, and bring participants from the film there. That's like, then people are like excited to work with you because you're eliminating the funding side of things, you're eliminating the revenue side of things, somebody else contracts and all of that, and then to go to the DoD point of the Department of Defense partnerships that we made. And I can talk this in more detail, but I envisioned like lots of paperwork in terms of like how is this chaplain going to show this at a Air Force base if he has to or she has to sign a contract, get funding from their whatever commander. Is this going to junk it up? And when I've worked with these partners, they've all asked, do I need to sign a licensing agreement? Do I need to pay you? I said, no, here is the link. Just go download it and use it. And so we really, I think, with ITVS money and working in the public media space, really adopted this idea like public media, let's make it as accessible as possible, eliminating the need for people to pay us, and then that goes to putting it online on YouTube for as long as you want. And so that was kind of some of the design of like, how do we lower the bar for greater uptake? And I think paywalls and licensing agreements are all really important, and it's a totally legitimate way to go about distributing your film. I think what we're talking about here is potentially like a philanthropy partnership where you can kind of eliminate some of those hurdles to getting people to use your film while as filmmakers at the same time still getting paid.
And
Yeah.
I just want to fill in some gaps real quick, too. So when David and I first met, we met through the Islamic Scholarship Fund, where both of our respective films had gotten grants, and we started talking about working together. And in the early period when I was kind of deliberating the idea, I had suggested to David, like, reach out to these X, Y, and Z organizations, which he had already started relationships with, like MPAC and ISNA, which are major American Muslim institutions. And so relationships with those organizations also paid off big time later on because we maintained those relationships. And in fact, going back to 2019, we presented clips from the film as a work in progress on a panel at Sundance in 2019 in partnership with MPAC. And so the fact that David had those relationships already was very important to me and very validating that this was going to be a project for and with the community. And later on, as we were reaching the completion of the film, we involved some of the most prominent American Muslim chaplains in looking at giving us feedback and watching cuts, and then also presenting the film at the Islamic Society of North America, which is the largest gathering of American Muslims in the U.S., which was the first public screening of the film in September of 2023. So we started forming a lot of these relationships with nonprofits, both in the Muslim community, in the chaplaincy space, and then the government space as well.
Yeah, I'm going to just say this one thing. We didn't do any film festivals with this film.
That's right.
Our premiere was at the Islamic Society of North America conference. Like, as people know, there's people laughing like, that is not like a sexy spot to premiere. And we were told, like, by other filmmakers, like, you maybe get 10, 20 people if you're lucky, right? We had like 150 people, packed house. People like crying at the film, people, feeling conflicted feelings about the film. But that's for me, in talking about this, we're at Sundance, it feels very important, right? But like, for me, in terms of impact, and I think Razi's on the same page, like, that film and showing it there felt like 10 times more impactful than showing it to a room of people who are just like, I kind of got tickets to come to this. This is kind of interesting. What camera did you use? All that kind of thing, right? Like, so I would say, like, for you guys, like, for me, it's taken a lot for me to kind of like deflate my ego to the point where you're like actually working on the ground with stakeholders, like, makes you feel in a hard place, like it can feel better. It's not as sexy. It's not as like press worthy. But the feedback you get from the audiences and the people who are there, like 100% better than the great film festival premiere.
Well, and also longevity too, but I want to take a couple steps back. You can tell they're incredibly strategic and have thought so many things out. What kind of conversations, when you're working with those various organizations, they're not all, they don't all have the same mission, right, or the same constituency. What kind of conversations did you hope would happen when these different groups engaged with the film?
Yeah, I mean,
J-Star and those guys too.
yeah. So some of the early and some of the deepest relationships we had were with American Muslim chaplains who work across many different kinds of institutions, hospitals, prisons, military, universities. So it was really important for us to, and then they're all colleagues, so they all know each other. It's a very niche profession, so a lot of people know each other, and so it was really important for us to be in conversation with them from the very beginning, because we knew that. At the same time, there was also a really important book that was coming out as well, the Mantle of Mercy, which was the first kind of like volume of history of chaplaincy and kind of some contemporary issues for American Muslim chaplains. So the book was coming out, and so we wanted to pair with other things that American Muslim chaplains were dealing with, other issues in their field, and for them to use the film as an education guide, as a training guide. And so similarly, other conversations with, whether it's with the government, whether it's with the military, whether it's with chaplaincy organizations, there are different conversations, but we really wanted the film to be an educational tool in all those spaces primarily. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're pointing to is like, there's no one target audience. There's target audiences, right? And so, yeah, I mean, we present at the American Academy of Religions conference. Again, not like on your festival dream list, right? It isn't. But we presented there in San Antonio. A high-ranking chaplain who was based there came, saw the film, saw like these guys are doing good work. We flew in some of the chaplains to come and speak to the audience, and that relationship then led to her helping us get approval to show this film over 10 times now to a cohort of incoming chaplains as part of like a pluralism and diversity training. So these are like incoming Air Force chaplains. They're in training, and their instructors have showed this film up until recently. It's all been cut now, but recently to chaplains who may never work with a Muslim chaplain. It was that for me was like one of the greatest kind of impact and outreach moments, was to say we got inside this organization where these things, they're actually watching the film, and 20 chaplains were having a conversation about it. We were never present. But like, how cool is that?
And that was a big goal, right? It was to work with the Pentagon, was to really make sure that it was accessible within the military. Go ahead, Razi.
Oh, I just wanted to add, beyond stakeholders, for audiences, whether it's American Muslims, and the general American audience that's watching this film, it's also so important to see Muslims in these roles. Without diverse democratic institutions, those institutions get compromised, they get weakened. So it was also important for those audiences beyond just the stakeholders as well. And we can get into that a bit more in terms of how the communities reacted a bit too, but yeah.
So we want to make this conversational, and so we're not necessarily holding back on questions. So does anybody have a question right now that they want to raise with the team? Sure, right there in the back, right there.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak more about how you secured the DoD contract. Like, I understand there are like government grants and such for filmmakers, and I want to know if I don't know the storyline of Three Chaplains, but I'm wondering if, because it's a military film, they're like a little bit more encouraging, or if that's an open platform of whatever story I want to tell, there might be a path for funding through that.
Yeah, well, there was no actual DoD money.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. When I say, I maybe I misspoke. This is more permission for them to approve production. So when then you show up to film, they have somebody assigned to you. Sometimes they fly in, sometimes they don't. This was like very. I felt like a bit of a sneak attack a little bit to make this film, because, we come on with these sensibilities, quite progressive, and we're on these bases, and normally people are pitching like the baddest warships in the fleet, kind of like tech, kind of like weapon porn almost,
Top
right?
Gun.
Yeah, or Top Gun or Miss Marvel, and this kind of thing, like, in speaking with like working with institutions, which is part of this panel, it's really important to find allies within these institutions that can advocate for you. And we so happen to, this application to work with the DoD landed on the desk of one public affairs officer who, when she picked me up the first time, was like, I could have not approved your application, but I think this is really important. She sees me, I'm like a filmmaker from Oakland, California. She's got me pegged, and I think I have her pegged. And she's like, I volunteered on Bernie's campaign. I think you may think of me differently. I was engaged to a man from Iraq when I was there, and this is really important. So, I guess a lesson to understand, like, the people even inside these institutions that you think may be thinking one way. There's some of the same diversity of thought that we have out here is being represented in those institutions.
Tell us a little bit about what you feel, because you do have some hindsight, and we were having a conversation a couple days ago about impact. And not every film team is set up to have this kind of an impact campaign. Not every film team wants to do that. They want to move on to their next thing. Not everybody has the resources or the access. There's so many different ways to slice and dice this. But now with a little bit of hindsight, what do you feel has been the biggest impact of the film, or the thing that's really stayed with you or the community the most, and the audiences that you intended to reach?
I think one of the most complicated screenings we had was at the Pentagon. And there's a lot of anecdotes we can share from that screening, but one that comes to mind was, I don't remember what his position was, but
The public affairs guy.
yeah, he was really surprised at this scene, and he was sort of challenging us, like, why did you want to include this scene in the film? Obviously, as a public affairs person, he wouldn't be too happy about seeing a scene where the American military is being criticized in such a direct way. And it was a very anxiety-inducing experience for me. It was also so close to October 7th and the sort of reality of the American military and the Department of the Department of Defense being so intimately interconnected with the Israeli government. So there was a lot of weight kind of going into that screening. And so, but I tried to speak from the heart. And then Khalid, who's one of the chaplains in the film, he was also there. And I just shared with him that what Sharita is representing is reflective of the vast majority of Americans and how they have felt about the war on terror and how the community's been impacted and how they have felt in the way that this war has been engaged overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan, and how many innocent victims there are. And if we had left that out, it would have presented an inaccurate description of not just the American Muslim experience, but it's how a lot of Americans feel about the war on terror. And so he was taken aback, but I think it resonated. I think it set in. And I think that allowed also us to have like a very open dialogue in that room. And so Khalid opened up about experiences of Islamophobia that he had in the military, and his colleagues had never known that.
Yeah.
And so they were very moved by hearing about these experiences that they didn't know about with someone that they have served with for 30 plus years. I would say that was one of the most impactful moments. And I mean, I was very confused and unsure about whether I should even be there or not. And in that moment, I felt like, it was good to be in that room. And it's part of that bigger conversation of like, do you show up and try to change things from the inside? Do you show up to that dinner table, or do you try to work on the outside, and if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, as the saying goes, and it's just one of those moments, and so, but yeah, if there's anything else that comes to mind.
I mean, similarly, I brought Khalid, who's one of the there's 3 chaplains. You see one in here. There's 2 others. One's name is Khalid Shabazz, who's now a colonel. He was the first Muslim chaplain to make colonel. And so he's fought many fights over the decades. I brought him to a screening again, not on the top of your wish list for screenings, to Camp Blanding, the Florida Air National Guard training center, like 50 miles south of Orlando, like middle of Florida. I've never been there, and this old National Guard base, and we screened the film at a chaplains conference. There were all the chaplains and religious affairs people who were there for this conference, and Khalid came, and my stage presence got a little better as I've worked enough of these screenings, and I started asking people, particularly veterans and people who've served in the military, like, do you actually feel like your experience has been accurately portrayed on screen? Because there's 2 parts of it here, right? Like, have Muslims been accurately portrayed on screen? In which we can all, I think, pretty much say resounding, like, no. But also these people, I think, I was interested in, like, did you feel like there's so much kind of war porn that's put in on screen? Has your experience been accurately represented? Everybody raised their hand saying no, it has not. And then Khalid was there to speak to that, and it really opened up this great conversation. That was like one of those, like, I'm speaking to a bunch of stakeholders here who are going to walk away after watching this film and hopefully have something really good to think about this and chew on. but it speaks to what Rosie was talking about. We've tried as much as we can, and this is thankfully to have the funding. This is where the funding piece really comes in, to bring the chaplains with us to these screenings, to like let them have the mic as much as possible, because although we feel like accomplished filmmakers, like people would rather hear them speak, and it gives them an opportunity then to forward their own story, but some of the messaging in the film. And so I would say that for other filmmakers thinking about impact is not just to think about your relationship with the filmmaker during the production phase, but like, how can we extend this into like an impact phase where this person's going to want to come with us and is going to want to speak to audiences and make the change in person long after the film has been premiered. Yeah.
Listening to you, it almost sounds a little too easy, right? You didn't walk in the door and just say, "Oh, we want to do this." How did you convince the foundations, and obviously they're critical to the success of this effort, about what you were going to do or what you hoped to accomplish? Why did they invest in the project? What was it that you pitched, if you can share? And then maybe the foundations want to say why they supported it. Not to put you on the spot.
I think with the first impact grant was with this Arthur Vining Davis Foundation, and this one previous grantee, he looked at my proposal and he says, no, they're not going to fund this, right? And this is what I'm talking about like when you go to work with a foundation, be it big money, small money, whatever. It's a lot of time that you're investing in this. Finding somebody who's been awarded and gone through the process, like let them review what you've seen or what you're proposing. And he's like, no, we need to tweak it like this. So it wasn't exactly actually what I envisioned doing in terms of like, it wasn't like David Washburn and Razi Joffrey flying around the country and presenting our film at college campuses.
It's not sustainable.
That's not sustainable. Nor I have 2 young kids, I don't even want to do that. But it was like, let's put this in the hands of student leaders and let them go to work. And then, but that was like a student piece. We were kind of missing some of the DoD veteran piece. And money for press, which we can talk about, which Doris Duke came through with money for actual PR. So another thing, for other, filmmakers here, we say we have this grant, you go to another foundation and say, would you match it? And that's what we did with Doris Duke. We said, can you match this? This is going to extend the life of this project. It's gonna make it more of a powerful impact campaign, and generally foundations like that things are moving in a good direction, and matching was what happened. Yeah.
And I just want to fill in the gaps a bit more.
They were production funder as well.
Yeah, and then also during the Impact campaign, we were, through the philanthropy, we were able to bring on multiple partners. And Eliza's back there from Red Owl, so they led our Impact campaign work with helping us with screenings and marketing. We also worked with the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab to help us develop a discussion and curriculum guide as well, and also organize screenings within their organization. So we also were able to kind of bring on an orbit of nonprofits, the Religion and Public Life website, where all of the educational materials and religionandpubliclife.org is sort of a Coursera for like religious studies content. So there's classes on there that are paired with books, magazines, films. So we are one of multiple projects on the Religion and Public Life website, which was founded by Nate Walker, who we mentioned earlier. So there was Religion and Public Life, which hosted our education materials and discussion guides, and then there was a chat message board for the students who were organizing, so they could share what works and what doesn't work, and they can share resources, flyers for their events, which other students would just then modify for their events, what worked for food and things like that. Chaplaincy Innovation Lab, which wrote the curriculum, and then Red Owl that helped us, with rolling out the campaign. So the philanthropy allowed us to bring all these folks on. There's just no way that David and I could have done it. We just don't have the bandwidth for it. And so, but we did have the leadership and the management roles to lead those organizations and work very closely with them to create the materials. So I think that's another big thing, that it takes a village of nonprofits and partners and stakeholders, because all of these organizations and nonprofits have a vested interest in advancing the messages of the film. And then, of course, there were the Muslim organizations as well that helped with screenings and supporting the project in many different ways as well, and giving us feedback and helping us roll out the films.
Yeah, I mean, what he's speaking to is like, you know, when you think about like, what's my impact campaign going to be? You don't need to like reinvent the wheel. There are people out there that have like already done this and have some models for success. Like, find those people and try to work with those people. So you're not like having to do this heavy lift of like, well, who are the people here? How do I design this? And you're like, oh, this person has this like this online curriculum. We can kind of plug and play into that. And so I would just say like a lot of it did come from like longer relationships with people that started during production, even sometimes before production, that then paid off when you're on the other side, because they were like, oh, okay, I know you. You've been dedicated to this. I want to work with you. And so that's a good lesson for us. Yeah.
Other questions? And I don't know if there's a mic going around, but maybe right back there?
I want to know if you're still in touch with the chaplains and how they're doing.
I am. I was recently in touch with one of the chaplains who's not in. You didn't see. He one of the chaplains over the course of the film grows his beard. He applies for religious accommodation to grow his beard,
Which has been threatened.
Which has been threatened. So I called him and I said, "How's things going?" You know, because the Secretary of Defense had this speech. I don't know if you caught it. Hopefully you didn't. Where he's calling like beardos. He's saying like, "What are we doing?" He's kind of really kind of like a full assault on like woke culture in the military. And Raphael's like, no, like I went through the process. They've all continued to be promoted and are doing well. I think in conversation, see, this is why I don't want this to be recorded, but it's okay. He's essentially just been told like, hey, just you know, lay low, do your thing. We need you to stay here, like. We don't need you to abandon. Like we want to, you know, we want to keep advancing this ball down the field. You know, we may have just had a 10-yard penalty to keep a bad football metaphor, but like we're going to keep going. And I mean he's kept his beard. And but I mean he's also like, there are some exceptions where I do think, you know, it is more complicated than just, you know, they're deep into it. They see things in many shades of gray. But yeah.
Oh yeah, just to add to that, I mean, they're also human beings with conscience, and so everything that's happened in the past 7, 8, 9 years, whether it's the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, October 7th, the war in Gaza, they have views and feelings about all these things. And I really encourage everybody to watch the film. It's available on the PBS.
Free on YouTube.
Free of charge on YouTube, on the Independent Lens PBS YouTube channel. But, there's moments when the sentiment that's expressed by Sharita are also expressed by the others as well. And Raphael talks about being in the military uniform. When he gets on a plane, thank you for your service. But when he's dressed as an imam, if he's giving a sermon, he's looked at from a very different look. Khalid talks about the same thing in the film as well. And so one of the things that they have to navigate, and you see it with Raphael and participating in Black Lives Matter protests in the film, which is a huge complexity for them. How do they navigate those things where they feel that their ethics and their personal morality is compromised, and they want to speak out, and they have to do it in an institution where they have to remain, objective in a way. And so some of that does come out in the film too, and it's one of the things that makes the film and the characters themselves very, very complex. Yeah.
Yes, right over there.
Zaki, I think that's you.
Thank you. Just given everything that's happened since you wrapped filming on this, and that you've already talked about, have you ever felt like maybe you need to develop a sequel? Or barring a full sequel, what are some other ways you can keep the content alive and dynamic, given how much things have changed, given how much you've just shared an example of how the chaplains themselves are having such very different experiences? Are there different ways to kind of reintroduce those conversations or bring them to current times? And I guess part of me is wondering, are there, especially with new technology, new platforms, are there new ways of storytelling to kind of keep the original story alive in new ways?
That's a good question.
That's a
Yeah,
great
really
question,
great question.
man. Oh man.
Just really quickly, I mean, I think maybe not a sequel, but There's so much that didn't make it into the film, as it always happens with films and documentaries. So there's stuff that's on the cutting room floor, including this interview with Imam Zaid, who's one of the most prominent American Muslim imams and who had served in the Air Force. His interview was just incredible. And he talks about his life and career, and he also says that he wouldn't serve again, but he became Muslim in the Air Force. Right. And so, again, carrying that complexity, in addition to that, there were just things that were impacted in the production of the film. So one of the arcs in the story was going to be Raphael going to Hajj. And we were already in conversation with the embassy, the Saudi embassy, which is, of course, always a precarious statement. But things were kind of moving along, and then COVID totally impacted that because you'll see in the film, again, if you watch it, like he's truly on this journey. And the Hajj was going to be this like real high point and a shift. And we had scripted it out. I mean, we had really planned everything out. And I had the privilege of having gone before. So we're talking cameras and how we're going to make it work. And then just COVID kind of, threw that all aside. And so, I think there's just so many threads in the story, how they've advanced in their careers. And then also, I'm very fortunate to have a lot of friends who are chaplains who work in hospitals, but especially universities. And so they are feeling so much heat right now because of the attack on students, Muslim students, who are advocating in what they believe is a genocide in Gaza. And so these chaplains are the frontline mental health resource for these students. And so, there's so much I can say about this. I actually am working on a project about the University of Michigan, where the film started with 11 students who were being prosecuted by the state's Democratic Attorney General for organizing encampments. They were facing criminal, felony, and misdemeanor charges. And so the chaplain at the University of Michigan, is dealing with these issues in the film, and the story that, and the issues that these students are dealing with. So, it would be fascinating to kind of expand it. Also prisons. So many Americans convert to Islam in prisons, often through, and often through the work of the ministerial work and the counseling and the services that chaplains provide. And so those are really, really important stories that I think could pair well to expand the story of three chaplains. But we'll pass on a sequel for now.
Yeah, it's so hard. As others who have worked on multi-year projects, like once you get to impact, some people are just so fatigued, right? You're so fatigued. But then that's when the work actually begins. And so this is a whole frustration, I think, for a lot of filmmakers. And as you know, the resources to kind of that second chapter once the film's premiered, can there be the resources there to help get the film on the ground where it can actually make impact? Because that word gets thrown around a lot, right? What is impact? And I would argue showing your film at a film festival is not impact. It's where things get discovered. It's where you create potential partnerships. But I do not feel like that's where impact is made. I feel like impact is made in those spaces, showing it to 100 chaplains at a Air Force base in the middle of Florida. It's showing it at the Islamic Society of North America, where you're having chaplains on stage talking to people having conflicting feelings about it. It's in the Department of Defense, where you're screening it for senior leaders, and Sharita Hossein says, there's been horrible actions on the part of our military. It makes people think a little deeper about things. It's not to discredit the work they're doing, but it's just to add complexity to things. I heard from a student who attended one of the screenings at a seminary we did. A seminary screening. So we've shown it at universities, but also reached out to seminaries, because a lot of these seminarians are going to get their degree and become chaplains. And she reached out and said, I actually attended one of these screenings. I had never thought about becoming a chaplain before. The screening inspired me to pursue chaplaincy. She's an African-American woman who wants to get into hospital chaplaincy, which we desperately need people like her in there advocating for patients. And so for me, you're that's just one story, but you're if the film inspired one person to do that, how many people is she going to impact in her life? So there's a million ways to measure impact, but for me, it really feels like it's on the ground, working with people who are truly invested in your story, not just I saw that next. There's just so much content now where you just see one thing and then move on to the next, and just because you had a view. 100,000 views, 200,000, 1 million views doesn't mean you're actually truly impacting that person, and that person takes the energy from your story out into the world.
I'm so glad you said that, because as we put more and more films in public media on YouTube, which we plan to do, and we've done about 20 in the past couple of years, it's not just about views. It's amazing when you get a lot of views. There's something to be said for that. You can see what's happening. There's a zeitgeisty thing that can happen, but that's not impact, right? It really is those stories, those anecdotes, and the idea that students were bringing the film to campuses, like, that's huge impact right there in an educational sense as well. I don't know. Oh, we have 5. I was just going to ask, how much time do we have? There's a couple questions, so we'll start here and then we'll go over there.
All right, it's not a question, it's a comment. I did not know about this project, but I'm so grateful to have come to this one. My mom is a lieutenant colonel. My dad is a Marine. 4 generations served in the military. I'm so happy that this story is here. I'm Puerto Rican and Jamaican.
Oh, wow.
So I really confuse everyone. They do not know what to do with me.
Please share the film with your family.
Yes.
Oh my God, yes.
One of our characters is Dominican American in the film. So yeah.
There's 2 of us.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to watch this project. Our stories do not get told, so I was
Yeah.
excited to hear, is there a sequel? It's the military kids, let me
and
tell you.
Just to Zaki's question, I just want to, it made me think of other ways the story could be expanded, as well as looking at other institutions of democracy, whether it's law enforcement or government right now. You have Muslims in Minnesota. The Attorney General of Minnesota is Keith Ellison. He's an African-American Muslim, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib. And so these questions about whether it's military, whether journalism, these are very challenging spaces for Muslims to be in right now. And I personally, myself, know people that have quit very stable jobs at the New York Times or CNN and other media companies. And if we take journalism to be one of those core elements of democracy, that space is starting to be questioned, whether it's for everybody. But then do you stay in the room and try to change things, or do you leave? It's hard to say, but that's another space that in which this story could be expanded into other areas of democracy and civic life.
Yes, right there.
Hi, I really commend you for picking specific audiences that you were going after, and the film is for everybody, but you set achievable goals on who you were going to reach. My question is, were there any audiences that you wish you could have reached, but maybe there's not the organization set up in order to reach that group yet?
That's also a good question.
I mean, we wanted to have more Muslim collaborators.
Yeah,
looking back, that's our probably.
Yeah. I think definitely the Muslim American community. I think there is a kind of discomfort around this particular topic in the film and the timing in which it came out, given the war in Gaza. I think also we would have loved to have done congressional screenings and a White House screening with the film, and so we were working on both of those. There was actually at the time, because of the writer's strike, the White House had actually put a pause, but we had a very close contact that was helping facilitate that under the Biden administration, and we really would have loved to have had the film seen at the highest levels of government, and then of course in the Muslim community, we want to kind of continue showing the film in those spaces.
So I want to, just because we're closing out, we have 2 minutes, I want to ask you both. I mean, so here we are at the film festival, a celebration of independence, and you did make a choice to make this a public media film. It is available on YouTube. Speak to that decision. Would you do it differently? Are there, to that same question of the audiences that maybe you didn't reach, or the constituencies you didn't reach? How do you feel about those distribution decisions that you made? What did they afford you? And then maybe what were some of the obstacles?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is unique. I don't expect people to replicate this, right? But to take lessons away from this. That's it. There's so much experience here in this room. I don't like to sit up here and say, do it this way, right? But I will say, being a proud, producer for content for public media, having been consumed it my whole life, I really did believe, to make something also about an institution that is a U.S. Government institution, that this really should be made available for people for free. I really do feel like, this sense that we want to make change with our films, social change with our films, but particularly for films on public television, like the minute we can pull it and get some kind of educational distribution deal and put it behind a paywall, we'll do that, or people do that. And then that paywall creates a whole barrier for people of access, right? For educators, for in my case, people in the Department of Defense, even for students watching it. So I really do think, like, if we're making films with public media, I'm not paid to say this. I really do believe, like, you should make it free, because, like, on the other end, like, as Razi can speak to and I can too, we put our films behind paywalls with, like, educational distributors, and you make
No one sees it. Yeah.
nobody. You make $1,000, $2,000. I mean, other filmmakers can speak to what they've made, and you're like, what is the value of that if you're trying to make change with your film? So I'm really like a proponent of putting your film out there, of also, in our case, like forwarding the stories of the characters. We had, with the help of the Doris Duke money and finding a good publicist and doing our own work, had this film, in the AP, 2 AP stories, ran, all over the place in all sorts of small town papers, but we're not in any of those AP stories. Like, the stories are about the chaplains themselves. So it's another moment of, like, not thinking like I'm going to get the big interview and it's going to be like about me, filmmaker, when the press and the film and the cause and the change that you want to make is more. That's like was a huge thing for us. Like, I could never have imagined getting in the AP, but they're not going to want to interview David Washburn or Razi Jaffrey just yet, hopefully. So I don't know. What do you want to say?
No, I mean, I wouldn't change anything. It was a very unique distribution, model and impact campaign. In fact, other films that, are behind a paywall of mine, including my Hamtramck documentary, I wish it was available for free. I wish it was accessible. I wish people could just go to YouTube and just watch the film. And when the contract with our distributor does end, we will put the film on YouTube so people can just have it. We definitely learned a lot, and I would like to apply this model and improve on it for future projects as well.
Well, and for us, it's important to remember, too, that it's available to the carceral system. People in the carceral system can access public media as well. So that access is incredibly important. So thank you for this. I love that this conversation is landing right now. It's so important to be thinking about not only public media and why it matters and why we must continue to fight for it, but also the different pathways that you can take and the compromises that you can make, but also the huge, huge successes and wins. So thank you for sharing. Thank you, Doris Duke Foundation, and enjoy the rest of your Sundance.
Thanks for coming. Thank you.